So I started building like Lego models when I was pretty young, maybe like 5 or 6 years old. I actually see this in my children. They also very much like building Lego. I was a little different. I mean, my family didn't have so much money, so I didn't get so many boxed Lego models. It was mostly secondhand. And so I didn't have any instructions for building particular models. I would just have to build my own, which was fine, gets the imagination going. And then I think around the age of 7 or 8, I was introduced to a computer. I think there was a couple of people in my sort of life that I sort of knew who had computers. One was a guy who just lived down the street, and another was a sort of family friend. I got sort of interested in programming computers from these two. I mean, I knew you could play games as well, but programming was very interesting. You could build things and make the computer sort of do what you were envisioning, what you were imagining. And so it was a sort of similar thing to building Lego, but much more powerful in terms of the things that you could achieve, because you could solve problems in a different way. With Lego, you could only really make models. A year or so later, I got my first computer. And the guy down opposite the road actually taught me how to program initially. He showed me a first few computer programs. And from there, I basically just taught myself. There was not much further tuition. I got an upgraded computer a year or two later. And for the upgraded computer, I managed to borrow an old programming manual from another friend, just for a few days. But it was long enough that I could teach myself the full language of the computer. I was enjoying myself so much. Like it was just what I wanted to do. Like, I would play outside occasionally too, but I spent a lot of my time in my bedroom just programming. This was like age 9 or so, 9, 10. I got a few more computers throughout my childhood, but programming them was always something that I did. I played some games as a teenager too, but I started making my own games as well. Not so much because I couldn't, have the games that I wanted. I could, but more just that I found it more enjoyable. It was a better creative outlet than just playing games.
What was the game about?
Oh, I made a few games. The first one that I was sort of proud of was a game called Dark Times, and it was a sort of game set in the medieval thing. It was a little bit like kind of World of Warcraft, but very early, before like 3D. You just got like a top-down view and you could walk around the world. But the world was procedurally created. So you never ever got the same world twice. It was always like different, and there would be things in different positions and different people would be walking around. And you could like, fight the people or trade with the people or like try and loot the houses or like go and fight animals in the forest and all this sort of thing. For me, it was just like a creative outlet. I didn't think too hard about it, but when I eventually, I passed it around to a few friends at school, and they said it was actually quite fun, and I should take it to the computer shop and show the guy who was like kind of the main manager of the computer shop. And back in those days, computer shops were a little bit more interesting than they are these days. Like they actually, it was more of a hobbyist thing rather than just a straight, money for video games. And so they would often have demonstration units in the shops, and the manager, if it was a cool guy, and in this case it was, would let you kind of play on the demonstration units, but then also like you bring maybe your own software and like have a look at it. My next game was, again, a 2D thing. It was all 2D in those days. But it was a bit like the game Bomberman, which is quite a popular game. And the main reason that I coded this was because, I actually played Bomberman somewhere else, like at a friend's house or something. And I didn't have so much money, so I couldn't afford to buy it. So I just made my own version of it. But then because, again, creative outlet, my own version ended up becoming quite a lot better than the original game, because I introduced lots of new features and different weapons and different kinds of enemies with different kinds of AIs, and it was like a really fun exercise. This was like when I was maybe 14 or so, and this one I actually sent to a video games contest in the national magazine for the computer that I was programming on, and although it didn't win the prize. It came second. In the commentary, it said that if it had been any other time that they ran the competition, it would have won the prize. But it just so happened that this particular competition, someone had sent in a game that had some like technical, some particular technical thing that they'd achieved. And because it was like the first time this technical thing had been achieved, they had to give the prize to this one. But they also said that my game was by far more fun to play. So I was really happy at this recognition. And then, unfortunately, I don't have a copy of it anymore. It was on a disc in my grand's garage, but my grand's garage was very kind of damp, lots of moisture in the air, and the disc just got moldy. I made a few more games when I was a teenager, but I think those two were the ones that I enjoyed the most, and probably my best work.
Did you always use the same programming languages?
For programming video games between, let's say, the age of 12 to 17, yes, I always used a particular language called Amos Basic. Now, normally Basic would be a very slow language, and you wouldn't want to program anything that was, going to do anything sophisticated. To be fair, my games were not that sophisticated, but they were sophisticated enough that it wasn't fast enough as it stood. So, but then they brought out a additional extension for the language, which was like a compiler, which basically made the games go 10 times faster. And this made it actually possible to make interesting games using the language. At around the age of 17, I switched from my old computer, Commodore Amiga, to a new computer, PC, IBM PC, that I built myself. I mean, that's what you always did in those days. It's a lot cheaper. You got a better machine for it. And it was a really bare bones thing. I think I spent £100 building a PC. Like, it was not a high-end PC, but it was high enough end that it opened up a lot of interesting possibilities. I was actually helped a lot by one of my school friends' fathers, who had a lot of spare old computer hardware. He ran a systems engineering company, and so he always had the most up-to-date stuff. And he just gave me like a case and a motherboard. And so I ended up only actually having to spend money on a CPU and I think a sound card or something. I think he gave me a monitor as well. So it was, the computer was actually not so bad, given that I only spent £100. And with this, I started programming in C++. This is a grown-up language, not like BASIC. And again, I started making video games. One of the ones that I remember most was a version of the Settlers of Catan, which is a board game, and I mean, sort of video game version of it. But to do stuff like this, kind of had to learn graphics programming. This is a bit of a different thing to just regular text programming, and it's not so easy in C++. There are lots of different ways that you can do this, and they're not all very compatible with certain hardware. I did start eventually to learn OpenGL a bit later, which allowed me to make graphical games. For a while, I switched to actually web programming, and I started making websites, and I made a website for my music collection, so I could upload it all and have have reviews and all sorts of stuff. It was quite fun. But eventually I made a game, or I started making a game. I never finished it. One of the games that I loved as a kid was a game called Frontier Elite 2. So this is a space game, a little bit in the same vein as EVE Online, but not online. It was one of the first really good 3D games on the platform that it was launched, the Commodore Amiga. It was really groundbreaking in many ways. I used to play this game a lot, and I wanted to make something similar, but on the PC, using modern graphics technology, but still with this kind of open world feel to it. And this is something that I've been wanting to do for several years. I sort of had some thoughts on the sort of design and architecture when I was 18, still at school. By the time I got to about 23 or 4, video cards, like graphics cards, were getting powerful enough that they could actually make more or less photorealistic, real-time sort of landscapes. And this was something that I really wanted to do, to make. And I got some way through making it, but unfortunately I was unable to dedicate enough, focus enough time on finishing the game. I got some nice graphical demos. And I think that was about the last time that I was really building video games outside of my job. I had a job in fact, working for the person that made this particular game, Frontier, at the company also called Frontier. But unfortunately, it wasn't actually really making games. I was just making the audio technology with which the games would be made. So, but it's something that I would like to get back into in some point in later life.
So was your creation before blockchain or mostly just on computers, or did you also build something outside of computer?
I did try my hand at electronics. For my technology project, I tried to make a sound sampler, which, I mean, these days, it would be a very foreign concept. It's not something that you hear about. But back then, in the 16-bit era, like early 90s, you needed one of these in order to record audio onto a computer. Like these days, it's just every computer has a microphone jack or Bluetooth or whatever. But back in those days, computers would normally be able to output some sort of audio, like make music and sounds and whatnot. But actually getting it in was hard. They didn't normally come with this functionality if they were just a home computer. And you needed specialist hardware. And the specialist hardware, I mean, it was not like super expensive, maybe £50 or something, but for a very poor teenager, it was beyond budget. And so what you could do is actually buy the microchips. And the microchips were pretty cheap. They were like maybe £1.50 or something. It was very, very cheap. But then to make the microchip work with the computer, you would need a bunch of other electronics to sort of go around it. And there were designs for these things. And so I sort of got a design for it and tried to make it. I think I had 3 attempts. Couldn't actually make the thing work. But I actually did okay in the design and technology project because I made a box for it, like a wooden and metal box with some knobs and things. So even though the thing didn't actually work, the fact that the box was made quite well and the knobs turned and there was like text on it that labeled things, it got given, I don't know, a B or an A or something.
So it sounds like you've been always enjoying creating stuff since your childhood, not just playing with the toy you were given. You were just creating toy by yourself and enjoying the process.
Like, as I said, my family didn't have so much money. And so, I mean, we were never hungry or anything, but most of my gifts would be secondhand, like at Christmas or birthdays. Certainly my computer gifts were secondhand. In these conditions, you know, I wasn't just going to play the same old game over and over and over again. It would have been very boring for me. And so, yeah, there was a pretty strong impetus to, you know, imagine and create and build. And this was throughout my childhood in various different ways. For example, I made a board game as a kid. And this, again, it came from, I was playing a board game at a friend's house. Quite a good one, actually, as far as it goes. It was Talisman, it's called. And I really enjoyed it. We played it oftentimes, like once a week or twice a week for a few months at least. And I thought it would be fun to try to make a sort of a game in a similar vein, but with like different elements and like alter the gameplay a bit. And so I did. And I think we played it once or twice. I don't think it went very far. But I sort of, game theory in general and like coming up with new ways of interaction has always been a very interesting intellectual pursuit for me, like, you know, from childhood. This, I mean, also sort of to some extent like politics and sociology, or some elements of sociology. And I guess kind of behavioral psychology, all of this sort of how people work in situations has always been something that's interested me thinking about. And so this led me to building another board game when I was older. I think I was 28, 29, or maybe even before, maybe 27. But anyway, I have a couple of very good friends that I went to school with, and we always liked playing board games. And I had a sort of idea for a board game that was kind of different to anything that I'd played before. That was sort of a kind of geometric, sort of like a building game. So you build a city, but where the scoring is based on geometry, and the essentially the ratio of the size of the building to the perimeter, or specifically the number of neighboring walls. And it was an interesting mechanic. I quite liked it, and it was not something I'd seen in any other board game. So I wanted to see if I could make it work. And so I set about trying to do this, and it went through a lot of iterations. I think it took about 2 or 3 years of iterations. I mean, not full time, of course. I had other things to be doing in life, but I play tested it over a course of 2 or 3 years, always evolving it and trying to finesse the rules and simplifying it. And eventually got to a point that I was actually pretty happy with the gameplay. This was, as I say, like several years later, 3 years later, maybe. Yeah, I think I was 31. And I sort of wrote everything up in a quite nice rule book. And I enlisted a friend of mine, one of the two from school, to help me sort of produce it. And he's very good with his hands. So whereas I did a lot of the graphical design, and of course the game design, he did a few of the actual artistic illustrations, and also he created the pieces, like the actual bits of wood. And we made 42, I think, copies of it over the course of best part of a year. And he, with him really doing the woodworking and some of the board production. I mean, again, we didn't have so much money in those days. So although you can pay not so much to get, a board game manufacturing company to do you a limited run of a few thousand copies. And it probably it costs maybe £10 or £15 per copy, but it's still way more money than we had back then. And it's kind of fun to build something yourself. Yeah, so we did, and we ended up with these copies. And I think I still have a copy, certainly. I think he might still have one or two. And I played it recently. It's like actually quite a fun game to play. Quite proud of it still. And it got a pretty decent review by one of the big German board game magazines. I don't know if it was ever featured in a copy. They said they would, but I don't know if I don't remember ever seeing it in a copy. Kind of once we finished it and got the prototype done and was happy with the rules and was happy with the thing, we kind of lost interest. This is like I think this is a big divide, right, between actually, ideating and building something and getting it there, like getting your vision realized, and then actually getting it out and like getting people aware of it and getting it sold, like marketing and business development and all this. This is like, it seems to attract two different personalities, these two things, like getting from 0 to 1 and getting from 1 to 100. Very, very different personalities. And I'm definitely the 0 to 1 personality.
It sounds like creating a board game has a lot of similarity to designing or architecting a blockchain network with crypto economics.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, blockchain networks these days are not quite the same as what they were 10 years ago. Aside from the split that we're seeing, where short-term and long-term thinking, there's also a split between pure cryptography and cryptoeconomics, where we see attempts at building large systems using purely exotic cryptography rather than rely on cryptoeconomics, being a bit of a conversation stream in the space. I don't think, personally, looking at the numbers, looking at the latest reports, that we are there yet, where we can ditch cryptoeconomics in favor of more sort of pure cryptography. But yeah, cryptography is hard, and it's harder than I can, it requires a mathematical brain that I just don't have. I know people that do have it, and I work closely with them, but it's not my brain. I'm definitely more of a game theorist and engineer than a cryptographer. And yeah, it's exactly right that designing an enjoyable board game is very similar to designing a secure and useful cryptoeconomic system. The thing that's common between them is that you are designing rules for the emergent effect of the rules, not for the rules themselves. That's the funny thing, and that's what splits us apart from politicians. Politicians, lawmakers, create rules, but they tend to do so without any regard for the emergent effect of those rules. They do so because they are patching a problem as they see it in society. And if what they don't oftentimes realize is that the rules that they create, which are, in their simplistic reasoning, are there to fix some issue as they see it, will often have very different effects to fixing the issue. Sometimes they don't fix the issue at all, they make it worse. And other times they might do something to fix the issue, but they also have far worse repercussions than the issue itself. And therefore, creating the rule is really, or creating the law in this case, is really not a good idea. As game theorists, it's about understanding the relationship between the rules and the emergent effects. And this is a non-linear relationship usually. It's an arbitrary relationship. It's not a relationship that is very easy to predict. And especially when you get into especially when you get many different rules, all affecting the outcome. The way that these rules interact it's like the three-body problem. It's chaotic. You just cannot predict it from first principles. You have to just sort of implement it and then put a bunch of actors in and see what happens and observe. Yeah, it's a little bit like, folding proteins or searching for the next material. It's like you can have a good guess at what sort of a recipe, or even making new food recipes. You can have a guess at what ingredients might go well together, and what cooking techniques might help, and what things they might be best served with. But at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. You have to actually make it. And sometimes even the best chefs will create total mess by mixing the wrong ingredients. The trick is, of course, a combination of enlightened guessing, serendipity, and just having a lot of tries. Just really accepting that the first time that you have a go, it's not going to be the perfect time. You don't hit this in one shot. But sometimes you'll find yourself on a path that seems like it's promising, and you'll go down that path and alter a few things. And this is exactly what happened with the board game. It's I had this idea that I thought it might be a very interesting mechanic, and I went with it, and it took 3 years of altering and changing and trying it out and seeing what the emergent effect was. How enjoyable is the game? Did people like it? Was there a strategy for winning it? Was there an obvious strategy and tactic, or was it just luck? And with feedback, with a lot of iterations, eventually you can you decide the path. You're at the optimum point of the path. You've arrived, and you seal it off, and bam, that's it. And it's it's an art in essence. Yeah, unfortunately, I fear that a lot of the rules that we have in society are oftentimes not really based on their emergent effect, but on the more short-sighted opinions of lawmakers.
Seems like there's a consistent sort of philosophy behind it, not just developments. When you look at Ethereum, ideal world computer, Web3, Polkadot, to Jam, to them. There's I see there's a consistent sort of philosophy behind the development. Do you think this is something that you acquire in your teenage time or 20s or adult time? Or this is something that you always had since the very beginning?
I think elements of it are quite deeply ingrained. I think I've never been at a point. Like, people often ask who my heroes are, or it has been asked at least. And up until not that long ago, I didn't really have a good answer. I never really had that many any obvious sort of heroes. I never sort of had this appeal to authority. In my mind, it was always there were systems, and some systems worked quite well. And like the system of science and academia. Whereas other systems maybe didn't work so well. But individuals, I didn't really have any particular, not respect, but admiration, I suppose, for. And this altered a little bit as I read a bit of philosophy and was a bit more sort of knowledgeable. And I would say these days, I probably have some people that I would say were pretty good people that I would look up to. One of the most such people was Richard Feynman. And he was, physicist, Nobel laureate. And it was basically just by reading his sort of autobiography that I thought it was pretty good sort of influence or icon or whatever. But overall, the concept of like authority has not been one that I felt very comfortable with. Not for others, not for myself. I feel that the world is probably going to be a better place without authority and trust, where people actually take the time and effort to, inspect and analyze the world around them and make appropriate decisions based on that, not based on what a trusted figure tells them or orders them to do. I remember when I was, 8 or 9, my stepdad said that he was going to, as soon as I got to 15, he was going to send me into the army. And the thought really struck fear through my bones. I really didn't want to go to such an authoritarian, hierarchical system. And I don't know why this was. Maybe I just had bad experiences with authorities when I was young. I don't know. But the feeling that we should try to live in a society as peers, not as clients and authorities, was definitely a sort of quite deeply felt attitude, and it almost certainly comes out in what it is that I'm working on. Yeah. And even the video games that I want to make, right? This like space trading game and the original on the Dark Times medieval game. These were all based on an open world where there is no like authority. There is no like, you don't operate under a hierarchy. There is no like big baddie that you have to prove you're a hero enough to get. It's just an open world, and there are maybe benevolent things in the world and maybe less benevolent things in the world, but like, you know, you're out there for yourself and it's more of an exploration. And this was always the kind of game that I was more, I felt more, was more enjoyable to play. And I think this, you know, bears out through life as well. It's like life is more fun when you're a free agent exploring the world, making your own decisions. And, yeah, it's not always so easy, but it's the better way of living life, I think.
Is that something like this kind of a pursuit of free world, something that you still deeply care about, and then this is something that still kind of gets up you and motivates you to keep building after 11 years?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a deeply felt like principle that I think I'd be very surprised if it goes away ever. You know, they say people get more conservative as they age. Maybe it will. Who knows? But yeah, certainly it's at this point as strong as it ever was. This feeling, and with Jam, and you know, the sort of things that I've been working on more recently, the last 2 years or so. I think it's coming back. I think Polkadot was, I mean, it was still very much designed and created to be in line with the Web3 principles, decentralization and so forth. But it was the way that it was executed. And in part, this is explained by our hands being sort of tied by the means by which we raised funds to build it, and the various structures in place that we needed to put in place in order to feel legally secure. But it was very much a sort of sprint to get it built and get it delivered. And the actual, the building of it was not so in line with those principles. It was built by parity, so, you know, a single organization. And still to this day, there is really one main Polkadot implementation. That's Parity's implementation. You know, there are others that are getting to the point of being viable, but there is really, you know, there is one leading implementation, and it was sort of designed and developed by a single sort of team. And this was a product-oriented approach, software-oriented approach. And with Jam, I think we are returning. I see that we are returning on purpose back to something much more decentralized, and in line with my desires to live in this more peer-based configuration. As I said, I don't feel especially comfortable with authorities, nor do I feel especially comfortable being an authority. The reason that, you know, I'm still here building stuff, aside from the fact I just enjoy building, is to try to avert the need to have authorities. So it would be very counterproductive if I also positioned myself as an authority. You know, I do what I can and I have my opinions. If people want to listen to them, that's fine. But I have no desire to be placed on a pedestal and worshipped as an idol. This is really not my vibe. And I feel uncomfortable when it happens. Like this is actually something that sort of really turns me off, makes me want to sort of go somewhere else. I would much prefer to sort of, I mean, I like to do, I like to work alone. I like to, you know, I like some degree of intellectual purity. And I think that when we are exploring this world of crypto economics and invention and innovation, there are very good reasons to give people like individual latitude. There are times where you want to come back and get opinions from others and collaborate. But a lot of this this initial invention, I think it's very important not to do it in a committee. You can really get hamstrung if you try and do it in a committee. Because there's always another idea. And there is, in a committee, there is no real impetus to commit to a particular person's idea. You end up just passing the baton. New idea, new idea, new idea. You end up getting paralyzed. So I think it is very helpful to have ideation happen amongst one or very, very few people who can really push it forward, who have a real strong incentive to develop it to a point. And developing it can obviously also include iterating on it, getting other people's ideas, but there needs to be a champion, intellectually speaking. But once it gets to a point of being built, then I think it's important to, or rather at least once it's prototyped, demonstrated as being a good plan, proven its mettle, then I think it's very important to decentralize. You know, the champion carried the idea to proof, and then it's up to, now it's proven, it's up to other people, maybe them as well, but certainly more people, to carry it through to deployment. As I said before, I think that this attracts sort of different personality types to some extent. I'm definitely earlier on. Like, I like this earlier on thing. And the problem is that it's not always so clear, particularly, maybe it's clear to the individual in question when their period of being the champion ends and the period of handover to the wider population begins for people to carry it forward and decentralize. It's not always so clear to everybody else. The reality is that a lot of people, they really like the idea of authorities that they can trust. Like it lets them be lazy. It's like, if I can place my trust in this leader, then I don't have to think about anything that they think about, because I will just take their opinion. I'll just follow them. I mean, you know, I get it. And it's like, it's their opinion. It's like, it's their choice. Guess they can do it if they want to do it. But it's not, I think it can be problematic if too many people do this within a community. And they end up following the leader off a cliff or into a desert. Yeah.
Now we are halfway through this jam tour thing, and then you being physically going through different locations around the world. You've been meeting the actual implementers or people who are interested or excited about jam. How do you feel about the current process of actually building jam in a decentralized fashion?
So far, I'm very optimistic. I see a level of excitement amongst the jam teams that was absent for the development of Polkadot. They love jam. I mean, they are taking ownership of their actions. You see, Polkadot was developed inside of a company. Now, to some extent, of course, people rose to the task. Some people very much rose to the task and took ownership. But I think as it's within a company, there isn't quite so much. It's almost expected. Almost. It's a little different when these are people that are not being paid. I mean, there's of course the prize and the fellowship that they will eventually get, and that comes with a salary and so on. But this is all future stuff. It's all premised on them actually delivering an implementation. And this is very different when you hire someone, give them a nice fat salary, and then they end up being a really great employee, because you already de-risked it for them. And then in that case, the risk actually was the company's risk, that they would not be such a great employee, and they'd end up spending a lot of money on someone that didn't perform so well. When you see people really taking risks with their own time, this gives a very different spirit. It shows that you have especially if they are capable of delivering, and in many cases I believe they are, with Jam, it shows that there is a sort of intellectual belief that's present that you don't really get with employees in a company. At the end of the day, company structure is, philosophically speaking, authoritarian. Right? There is a boss of the company. And they delegate to some extent to the C-level staff, and then they delegate further to maybe some team leads, and then the team leads delegate further to the regular employees. Each one looking upwards to an authority who tells them what to do and gives them a pat on the back when they do it right, hopefully. And this isn't the case with Jam. With Jam, I mean, I'm here as an advisor. I answer questions. Sometimes I give very short and maybe not so diplomatic answers, but curt answers, I think is the word. Not always. I'm usually quite friendly. And I write the paper, and I try to demonstrate and prove, if only to myself, but hopefully to others, that what's in the paper is a good plan. But at the end of the day, the relationship is one of me merely proposing something and the implementer teams believing that that proposal is sensible, believing that it's in their own best interests, or that they will, maybe out of enjoyment, maybe out of education, maybe because they believe in the future it'll be financially viable, good for them. But for whatever reason, they are acting to independently realize this vision, this proposal. This is a very different thing. And as I said, the vibe is far more like that of early Ethereum than I've experienced in since 2015. People are excited. They're excited enough to bother, trying to understand this admittedly quite terse paper and put it to software.
It sounds like the Jam is not just traditional like blockchain project. It sounds like it's beyond blockchain or crypto. It's even beyond Polkadot. Like, what would be the best sort of way to explain Jam? What is this tool for anyone maybe who might not be familiar with Polkadot?
So Jam is the join accumulate machine. It's specified as a protocol, hopefully a very unambiguous specification, which is in the grey paper, Jam's design and specification document. And it combines, as it says in the abstract, elements of both Polkadot and Ethereum. It takes some of Polkadot's crypto-economic machinery, the sort of low-level thing that makes Polkadot so scalable, and combines it with a more Ethereum-oriented sort of interface or service profile. In particular, allowing for programmable operation at the lower levels on the main chain, rather than just making the computational elements, these very powerful computational elements, programmable. It makes the way that you can join them together and accumulate their effects also programmable. Hence Jam. And indeed, it is, although it was proposed and gained widespread support to be the protocol upgrade for Polkadot, it is not limited in its design to specifically Polkadot. It is an abstract design, and it's, I think it's reasonably arguable the next generation of blockchain design. It does actually securely distribute workload across the network in a way that you can elastically scale applications deployed to it. And this is something that I don't see anywhere else. And then The really cool thing is that you can join these things together and scale applications even further onto other instances of networks. So it's got this like next generation scalability. It can be appealing to think of Jam beyond being Polkadot's next upgrade. When I write things like the Jam, like the grey paper, as I said, I'm not the 1 to 2 guy or the 1 to 100 guy. I'm the 0 to 1 guy. So when I write things, I like to start from first principles. I like to start from green field. Jam is an attempt to do that. Now, of course, a lot of the content of the Jam protocol is based on what was already devised and developed in Polkadot. But there isn't some new stuff in there. And by putting it all into a single document and starting at a very sort of first principles point, I think it makes it possible, or rather it maybe teases the possibility of this protocol being used for more than Polkadot, but sort of like the x64 instruction set in the past. So Intel, the chip manufacturer, American chip manufacturer, created the x86 instruction set for one of its chips. I mean, it's actually the history of this instruction set goes well before this 8086 chip, but the modern x86 instruction set sort of began in some sense when Intel released this chip, and it iterated on the 80286, 80386, 486, Pentium, and so forth, and it became the standard instruction set architecture for IBM, for PCs. Basically for computers, for a long time, desktop computers. And it was clear that a 64-bit upgrade was necessary. This was a 32-bit instruction set. Intel attempted to create their own version of this, very heavily based on their architecture at the time. It was considered too far out by practitioners who actually wanted to use this chip. Actually, it never really succeeded at all. AMD, a competitor to Intel, that had been up until that point really making alternative implementations of this instruction set, like cheaper chips. Not always so much cheaper. The Athlon actually was a pretty decent price performance thing. It wasn't so much cheaper. It was actually very, very highly performant at the time. But still, Intel was considered the king, the one that actually had designed the instruction set, and AMD was considered the sort of competitor, the new entrant, and to some extent the follower. If Intel made an extension, it was sort of up to AMD to try to implement it in its own hardware. And the tables turned with AMD's 64-bit extensions. They made a very simple but effective extension to the 32-bit instruction set that Intel had invented many years before. AMD 64, I think it was called. And in the end, Intel copied this. Intel became the follower and AMD became the leader. This was a very interesting shift. Intel essentially had to give up its own earlier 64-bit instruction set in favor of AMD and the market, which obviously preferred this. Now, Intel didn't want to call its implementation of AMD's design the same thing as the same name. It didn't want to say it had made chips which were AMD 64 instruction set, of course. So there became a sort of a neutral naming policy for this, x64, and both chips still support the same. Both manufacturers still support the same instruction set. The point I'm drawing to is that Jam I see as a contender for this x64 technology. It's proposed as being just a sensible way forward for blockchains. Blockchains that care about actually Web3 principles of being resilient and decentralized and so forth. And it leaves enough undefined, like governance, like issuance, like staking mechanism, all this stuff, that the different chains in principle could take on the Jam protocol and have their own models for these things. They can have their own programming languages. The PVM is which Jam utilizes, is a very general instruction set. But they would benefit from Jam's scalability and Jam's composability. And in principle, they would also, down the line, potentially benefit from the ability for Jams to be brought together. And one of the things that I'm thinking about at the moment, something that I hope to write a document on in the not too distant future, is how we might take two different networks with two different tokens, but both implementing Jam, and bring them together, keeping both tokens, but having a single shared security network. And I see this as a potential, maybe not quite end game, but a potential game changer for crypto. I think the Jam technology, much like the Ethereum 1 technology, which was sort of copied, relaunched in other chains, some taking more of it than others. The EVM in particular was utilized across many different blockchains, but much of the Ethereum execution architecture, the transaction format and so forth, was also copied in some blockchains. And I think Jam has the capacity to be utilized in this sort of very token and network neutral way. As I said, I wrote it to be a neutral technology, and I propose that it's a good, solid innovation that could see blockchain through another, who knows, 5, 10, maybe more year cycle, inevitably with further development, further optimizations. Some elements may be removed in favor of ZK if ZK becomes actually economically viable. But overall, I see this, the Jam structure, as a very reasonable innovation that is applicable well beyond Polkadot, if whatever governance system those chains or projects have, want to use it. And part of the Jam approach of decentralization early, of protocol-based design, where we publish the specification before any implementation, where we try and get 35 different implementation teams across the world, where we really try to decentralize protocol knowledge. I think this can really help Jam sort of fulfill that possibility of sort of bringing a neutral technology to the Web3 blockchain world.
So we've met a lot of sort of implementers, people excited about Jam, and a lot of them like very young. Student could be students. They're like young new breeds. If you leave a message for people like that, they could be someone very similar to you, maybe you 20 years ago, who likes to build stuff and desire for free society, free world. What would you like to say to those people?
Get in early, get in deep, and follow. You got to follow if this is where your heart is, if you believe in this kind of free world, self-sovereign, the enlightenment philosophy principles, then you got to fight for it. No one else is going to fight for it for you. And especially in the way the world is moving now, where we see increasing authoritarianism, We see the rise of the far right. We see very arbitrary decisions being made, increasingly personality politics controlling nuclear-armed states. We see the order that the world has developed in crumbling, and it being very unclear about what, if any, order will take over. This is a very important time for Web3 technologies, partly to help resist disruption caused by fighting nations and fighting mindsets, and partly to safeguard against the possibility of a very chaotic international order.
Could be also impersonation by AI.
So increasingly we're seeing the trust relationships in society break down. One of the sort of terms that came up in, 2014, 15, was this idea of a post-truth society. Society that doesn't believe in universal truth anymore. And I mean, there's perhaps some rationale to this, though I don't think it's true. Philosophically speaking, I don't think it's true. I do still believe very much in truth. And that, it's up to people to find truth, and that decisions not made on the basis of truth, of what the person can reasonably believe is true at the time that they need to make the decision, is bad. But I do think that we did enter a post-trust phase. I think people are beyond trust to some extent, or maybe their trust is consolidating into some very concerning demagogues. Either way, AI is not going to help. AI is going to screw everything up even more. Don't get me wrong, AI is useful for certain tasks. It helps us communicate with each other, potentially. And it certainly is pretty interesting for art. I use it myself when DJing, when making music. But in the world of socioeconomics, of politics, of geopolitics, it is dangerous. And we need some very effective technology in order to try to limit the dangers that it poses. Regulation is definitely not going to be enough. Regulation essentially just prevents individuals in free societies from gaining the benefits of AI. It doesn't stop malicious organizations in free societies, nor does it stop foreign non-free societies from acting maliciously against free societies. Therefore, it's a bad plan to attempt to regulate it in free societies. However, what free societies really need to do is try to stem the negative effects of AI, both with its usage within the society and its usage against the society by others outside. And the only way I can see of doing this, and of course I'm probably a bit of a biased observer, but the only way I can see of doing this is Web3 technologies. And the reason is very simple. AI is, at its very heart, less truth, more trust. We trust the AI, and in particular, we trust those who provide the service to us, either by giving us the pre-trained model or by actually literally running a server with which, behind the locked doors of which the AI itself is run, the model itself is queried. We have no ability to understand. I mean, oftentimes even the people who trained the thing have no ability to understand, but we have no ability to understand its training data, nor do they have an ability to understand how it is coming up with its responses. This is very dangerous compared to the alternative, which is that we do our own research. As people become more reliant, more trustful, more reliant on AI, we fall into this trap ever more. So if AI is less truth, more trust, then we definitely need Web3, which at its very heart is less trust, more truth, to counterbalance it. And it's about time that free societies get on board, and not just get on board as in stop over-regulating it, but get on board as in start actually pumping money directly into those who are creating actual Web3 solutions.
And from the perspective that a lot of new developers are now coming into the jam, can you give us some projection in like 5 or 6 years?
Predicting the future is always very hard.
Yeah.
I can tell my own story. Towards the end of November 2013, at this point I lived in London, and I had a friend, Johnny Bitcoin, who was also a friend with Vitalik. And he told me, we used to meet once a month down the pub for a beer and just catch up, chat. And he told me this particular time down the pub that he had a friend, Vitalik, who was who was coming up with this new Bitcoin thing that was like called Ethereum, and he was looking for someone to code it up. And I said, all right, fine, pass me the, and because I've been like, yeah, I'm a great coder. Tongue in cheek, really, but he said, well, look, if you're so good at coding, you should code Ethereum. I said, all right, fine. And I became this developer, right? I mean, it was Ethereum, not Jam, but I became this developer. I got the white paper. It was a vision document. And that's not quite true. It was halfway between a vision document and an actual unambiguous formal specification. It wasn't totally unambiguous. But it had enough technicals in that it could be implemented. Work needed to be done, and it was done over the next 4 or 5 months to make different implementations actually compatible. And that work was what led to the yellow paper, an actual formal specification for the protocol. But I joined as an implementer, a single person team implementing this protocol idea. There was also Vitalik implementing it, and Jeff, who implemented the Go language implementation of Ethereum. I became, co-founder of the Ethereum project, set up Parity, creating further implementations. I guess you can sort of see the history now, but it came from me just signing up as a guy on my own who, in his spare time, implemented this protocol. So I don't know if Jam implementation teams are gonna enjoy the same journey that I did, but for me it was my entrance point. I didn't have any other entry point. This was it. And as it turned out, the sky was the limit. So it required me to to act beyond literally writing code. I had to also talk, and I had to meet potential investors and give presentations and ideate about what might be designed on it, and maybe even write a few smart contracts and extol excitement over the project, advise. I mean, there's a lot of things to it than just writing code, but writing code was what started it all, and writing code was the backbone throughout all of this. I don't think I ever stopped writing code for any significant period of time in the last 11 years. I mean, actually, it goes way back beyond then, but I don't think I ever stopped writing code for a significant period of time since I was 8 or 9 years old. I think actually the longest I stopped writing code was when I walked through Central America. That was 3 months. So this is the path that I trod. And if they think that that they can do, if they think that they have all of this energy and ability, then there is nothing stopping them, as far as I'm concerned, from treading that path, but for Jam rather than Ethereum.
Cool.
All right, easy. How long was that? 15 minutes.